very much to Nuffield for allowing me to actually speak to you today. And I think one of the things that's been very interesting in all the papers mentioned this morning is that each and every one of them had a serious issue with either men's health or a downturn in industry or something like that. So that really, and it highlights the area and the reasons that we actually got started at RAW. Now let's first talk about RAW and what it actually is. RAW, and I want to talk about why we started RAW. And RAW is really about community wellbeing, men's health, and there are reasons for stimulating men, and suicide prevention. So what we've got here to start with is really, let's talk about the reality of what is actually going on out there at the moment. The reality of the whole exercise is that, you know, in Australia, and these figures came from ABARE and medical research, that one person commits suicide every 4 minutes in Australia. That's quite a frightening statistic. And one person contemplates suicide every 15 minutes. It's rather difficult. And when you look at that, and the farmer commits suicide every 4 days, it's very difficult. And one of the things that you really find in trying to get the statistics is that they're very scant, very difficult to get hold of because nobody talks about it. The other side of the coin is for every suicide, it sort of on average affects another 30 to 60 people. Now this is, the research is telling us this, and the loss of social capital for every suicide is about $1 million. And that's only loss of social capital to not just the individuals but community, and it particularly affects us in rural communities. And then you get the incidence also of those that are affected by it, their degree of what should I say, chances of getting involved, you know, becoming, having some sort of mental illness or whatever, that's increased by about 60%. In Tasmania, the figures are even more frightening. Certainly on a per head basis, and certainly when we start looking at these national figures, we're 39% higher than the national average. At the time of inception and when we started really looking at, when the founders of Rural Alive and Well started looking at that, the previous started looking at putting it all together. For the previous 20 years, there were 1,452 suicides, with estimated 16,500 attempts. And that's just in Tasmania. And what have we got? A population of nearing 500,000. So we're really against the ball game. The worst age group is 30 to 44, and the next worst is actually, and that's about, I think they're about a bit over 40%, and the next worst one is that 45 to 60, which is about another 28% or something like that. The numbers are a bit like that. And the statistics that they've got suggest 80% of males and 20% of females are the broad numbers. And what we actually also found at that particular time when they started that there were a lot of people, they weren't 24/7, but they were on the ground in urban areas, but it was very difficult to find somebody that was actually out there to assist people in rural areas. The situation, I just thought I'd throw this graph in for you. It gives you some idea of where Tasmania sits in relationship to the national average. I think if you look at that area there, in those areas there, that's where drought started, and that's where we started to have some problems, particularly in central Tasmania, in the southern Midlands and the Central Highlands in particular, was where we started to see an increased rate of suicides. So, in the issue within that really got us motivated was that you know, there wasn't a lot of professional help for us. If you could, and the slide there talks about a GP appointment, in actual fact it should have been a professional appointment, but if you could get one of those, if first you picked up the phone and tried to do something about it for either yourself or a friend, there was probably a 6-week wait to get in to talk to somebody. In most cases that was too late. If you actually happen to get there, then you've probably got a 30-minute consultation and there's no follow-up. And your next consultation might be another 2 weeks. The problem was that there wasn't anybody on the ground to help you. So we went from there and a few community meetings and so on, and what actually really pushed it along was in the mental health, in some of the local areas there, we had this situation. The local medical centre said, sorry, not our bag, we're not trained for that. You've got to go somewhere else. And governments tried to bring in and sort of create offices in some local areas, but the problem is men are stoic. They're bulletproof. They don't believe, you know, if they see it as total stigma, if they're seen to be having to go and pick up the phone and actually go to an office and talk to somebody in an office. Wrong environment, totally wrong environment. And that silo effect that we've seen a lot, and I was at a conference on Wednesday from the National Mental Health Council, and that sort of stuff came through pretty clearly. So men really don't want to go to those sort of areas. So we really get the majority of stuff, the majority of the services and the majority of the funding going into this mental health area and was going to research, and very little going to on-ground services to actually do something about the problem. It's all very well to collect the statistics, but we've got to do something about it. So really, RAW really started by, there's a few people in Tasmania that got together, headed by John Jones, who was a councillor in the Southern Midlands, and there was such people as the local priest, the guy from Dyer, who was a sheep and wool officer, had seen a lot of it. The pastoral houses that developed and went and spoke to these people had seen a lot of it. They were the people that actually got involved, and they held a meeting. And the interesting part at the meeting, the community meeting that they held in Oaklands it was that after that particular meeting, it was the women at the meeting that came up and grabbed hold of these guys and said, hang on, you've got to do something about this, you can't let it go. And so they got together, and certainly there's a lot of support from local council, TFGA, the people like Roberts, and also a lot of the other community organisations like the Salvation Army and organisations like Beyond Blue, and there's a raft of them, and you probably all know them all, but they also were involved, but they all have a slightly different service, and a lot of them are a telephone service and talk to a counsellor. What evolved out of that was, and going forward, was that we started to get ourselves together and started to really work on it. So this is really talking to you about, you know, who we actually are and what we're about. You know, we're about supporting rural families. We've developed networks, and we're developing networks through communities. We're involved in training and those sort of things and supporting other people. We harness the goodwill. It sounds like a whole raft of, you know, feeling, but we, and they're all really serious issues. And the bottom one about we're a non-for-profit and not a government organisation. So what we did was, went from there and we developed a strategic plan, and we discussed all of that, and that's before we actually got any funds on the ground to actually do it. We were funded by the pastoral houses and various other bits and pieces of donation from community and council in the early days. And that's basically the strategic plan, was understanding those sort of things, and then we talked about the main areas into which we wanted to get involved in, which really took it to the next level. That was the basis of our strategic plan that we were looking at. So the real question is, so what do we actually do? And that's a very serious question. And I guess the top one, farm, home and counselling services, referrals for men and their families and so on. When we started, it was very difficult to get people to actually talk to us about, or let us know that there were people out there. It was a case of having to get information and having to get people. We actually did what we'd loosely call cold calling. And literally, the outreach workers that we actually employed to do this, and we started off with one, and he would literally drive up the drive and talk to farmers and talk to people. It was quite extraordinary, and people started to hear about what we were trying to do. We would get a neighbour would say, Bloggs is in a bit of trouble. We think he's not travelling too well. He gets up in the morning and his wife is telling me that he gets up in the morning and he goes out and he spends the morning doing everything, but he comes home at lunchtime, pulls all the blinds down and has a sleep. Not a good scenario if you're on the land. So that was quite successful, and it really got things going. So we now...
What's the number? Rob wants to ring. It's called a cat nap.
No, these went all afternoon. It wasn't a cat nap, but and then and the other side of the service is we're a 24-hour crisis response service. So in other words, we get a call from somebody, we will go 24/7. Somebody will actually go and sit down and talk to somebody. It doesn't happen if you pick up the phone, it's a face-to-face. And it might start out as that sort of exercise. And we're on, with new technology, it's not too difficult. And then what we've done is we've also tried to gain the confidence of the community. So we got involved in all sorts of things, and I think we talk about Ag Fest, Ag shows, and all sorts of other areas. It might be we were involved, well, we'll get down to the bottom of that, men's sheds and so on. We got involved in trying to auspice a lot of those and get them going. So we did a lot of that and a lot of communication stuff within community to really get our message out there. We did only really start in the Central Highlands and in the Southern Midlands area, which are two local government areas in Tasmania. But they, particularly the Central Highlands, is a fairly remote area and rather difficult to get to in a lot of cases. One of our guy now, who's the manager of our outreach services, was instrumental in starting the one of the guys that was instrumental in starting the Rural Services Network. The Rural Services Network is made up of people like Beyond Blue, Anglicare, what are the other ones? There's a whole team of them. And Relationships Australia, and a lot of the government departments as well, because what we were finding in the rural areas was actually, in a lot of cases, they didn't even know who they were and exactly what they were doing. There was crossover of a lot of services, and it was trying to bring them all together so that they meet quarterly now, and there are over 50 organisations now involved in that, and they meet and they are dealing in the whole of rural Tasmania. So we got involved in that, and we're very strong on trying to get that to go to sort of get the service coordination together and get some sound information between the services that were going on. We got also involved in training and suicide awareness prevention, and we, through organisations with some services, it's interesting where the funds come from that we use. They might have come from Anglicare to run a course, and Assist is another one, which is applied suicide intervention training. We get involved in that, and auspice, those sort of things. Safe Talk is another one, which is suicide alertness and awareness for everyone. Just mental health first aid, we run courses in that. The Life Force, the suicide prevention workshops. We put them together, run them, and try and get them out into the community so that the community knows what's going on. The next one there is the Boys Mentoring Program, which is another thing we've done in a couple of the high schools around at the older age group, 14 up. And we've found other members of the community that will actually act as a mentor, go in there and they sit and they go around, they train, they go around and talk to the boys. They might pull an engine apart and rebuild a motorbike, or they teach them to fly fish and go up and take them up for a weekend and go up there and talk about fly fishing, talk about men's issues, secret men's business. And so those sort of things have been, that we've had a very good response with that. So that's been quite useful. And then of course men's sheds, and probably most of you know about men's sheds and what they're doing, but we've been instrumental in trying to get a few of those going throughout the areas. I think one of the things I should mention is, and one of the difficulties that we have is that actually the funding that we now get, which comes from the Department of Health and the Department of Health and Ageing federally and the Department of Health in Tasmania, is the documents we've got are very site-specific and about what we can do and what we can't do, which restricts our total movements to deal with all of Tasmania. It's a very real problem. That's not to say that we don't hop the fence and if somebody brings us up from over the fence, we'll try and deal with it. But it's not always easy to do that because our agreement with the government is very specific. We have raised quite a few funds from elsewhere, which gives us a little bit of that to be able to go to other locations. But we now, and to say now we actually we now have 6 full-time counsellors on hand. 3 of them are involved in agriculture and fisheries, and the other 3 are specifically dedicated to the forestry industry, which we're supposed to cover the total of Tasmania, and that's under the intergovernmental agreement that's gone on in Tasmania that's still not totally completed. But we got some funding out of that for some more services. So they're the sort of things we've got. Now we can talk about some of the results that we've had, and these are some of the last year's, to the end of the calendar year. We've had some 2,000 actual visits to our outreach visits to various people in need. And that says something itself in a small place like Tasmania when you're only limited to a few local government areas. And I might add these statistics are only related to our 3 outreach workers dealing in agriculture and forest and fisheries. We weren't allowed to deal with forestry within those areas, but our deed of agreement with the government was that specific. Average caseload per month, and these are the people that they're continuing to see, not the people that they might have seen elsewhere. People now have become aware of what we do, and it's really lowered this load of actually driving up the drive, although we still do a bit of that. I mean, if you're driving along and they've got some time left for the day, they'll go and deal with it. They'll go and just drive up and drive that they haven't driven up before, and talk to people and make them aware of what we do. People now call a lot more, expressing concern, and I might add, probably in the last month, the statistics that we have and that we're collecting would we had, just in the last month, 16 people that were severely at risk. We have been able to avert that risk and get them into the right space. But when we rate them at extreme, high, and we discuss the issues of really why, and we're trying to get some statistics on really why why they have this problem. We're trying to address that too. You must remember, of course, that our outreach workers are not trained psychologists. They're not. Their role in this is to actually find the right person after talking to them. Find the right person for them to go and see, so that they can get them in the right space and arrange it and follow it up and make sure that things are followed up, and that's what they do. Plenty of times they pick them up in their vehicle and taken them to the hospital, taken them down to the Royal Hospital in Hobart. It's that sort of service and that sort of dedication from these guys that really seems to have set the program going really well. The federal government had produced this document called Farming the Future, the role of the government in assisting Australian farmers adapt to the impacts of climate change. On the list of recommendations, recommendation 1 says the committee recommends the Australian government support rural counselling and support groups such as Rural Alive and Well, and place funding for such groups on a permanent and regular basis. Recommendation 1. We did a lot of lobbying and a lot of support to get to federal government to actually try and get that through. But when we look at our funding today, and it's one of our most serious issues, is our funding actually for 75% of our service actually ceases on the 30th of June this year. We have about $1 million budget from various formats and various areas of government. But while we've got we get a lot of verbal stuff from the Boffins about, yes, they're going to continue on and do that, but I like to see ink on paper. I'm not comfortable until I've seen that, but I suspect we're going to get through, and certainly the forestry industry in that point there, in the next point, was one of the ones from the Intergovernmental Agreement, and that allowed us to actually, we only got that late last year, and November we put on another 3 outreach workers to deal with that. The displacement within the forestry industry and the changes in Tasmania, you probably don't read about a lot of it over here on the Big Island, but that really has been a huge issue in Tasmania, and something like 3,000 or more people have been totally displaced, and most of them in rural areas, in the small country towns, the contractors, the loggers, the guys that are out in the bush actually doing it. So it's been a very serious issue, and they sort of said they've given us the first bit of funding, but I'm not sure about the second. The anecdotal evidence that we have within the area which we operate in is that certainly within the agricultural sector, we don't know of a death specifically in the last 2 years relating to those areas that we work in. And I think that you can take it as related to the areas that we work in. So we think we're kicking some goals, but are we actually kicking some goals? That's another serious issue for us to really deal with, so that we can concentrate on getting more funds out of government. Our achievements, it's pretty straightforward. I've talked about the House of Representatives report. We've certainly got enhanced community recognition. We've strong support from government departments, there's no doubt about that. We recently did an analysis in northeast Tasmania, and it related, trying to coordinate and make sure that there was nothing missing within the services, where the gaps are. We wanted to understand where the gaps are in service provision and so on. So we're hopeful of getting some, because it's a hot spot. There are a couple of other hotspots which we're not dealing with, which we want to deal with, but we can't get there because we haven't got the funding. And our deal agreement says we're It's outside our area. And we've won a few awards, as you can see, and some of our guys have actually won some awards for their services and what we do. I think the other issue is, what are our challenges beyond? And I've talked about the secure on long-term funding, and that's really our most serious issue if we're going to continue to progress this exercise. Assisting governments with a Tasmania Together plan, well, certainly that's what we want to do, but we won't be able to if we don't get the top one right. We want to continue to do these things. We want to, another thought with some of the members on that board is to engage with industry support, and certainly in a philanthropic way or however, but we're certainly working on that, and that's part of our strategy at the moment from a board point of view. And building resilience and capacity of communities to react to changing life experiences is ongoing. There's no doubt about that. And the other thing I want to talk about, the challenge, is keep talking to mates. You'll notice on the bottom of every slide I've had to talk to a mate. It is talking amongst men is one of the key issues. And there's no doubt this morning we've heard that. We heard from Andrew, was it? Yes, from Andrew, about the man ringing him up and crying over the phone. And that was a situation that developed over a loss of a crop. It's not unlike any of the other situations, the drought or for the loss of, the dairy industry have had their problem. They all have their problem. It normally seems to start with the way we see it is, it normally seems to start with a financial issue, which leads on to some issues within the family structure, and it gets to family breakdown, and then it goes from bad to worse from there. There can be so many issues in that. So those are the sort of things that we're trying to deal with. So what I'd like to leave you with, and I just like to acknowledge all those people that have been helping us, and there's certainly so many of them, but I couldn't fit them all on the slide. But it just is amazing the number of people that have been out there and supported us. And, while I sort of thank all those bodies and certainly make that clear, but I unashamedly stand here in front of you all today and ask Nuffield to endorse the program as a model for the total part of rural Australia. And that's what we're on about. That's where we want to go. And we think we've got a good recipe. I'm not suggesting it's the bee's knees, but we can adjust it. We're flexible enough to do that. But that's where we want to go. And we believe that it's a very serious issue and should be dealt with. And I'll leave you with that little thought at the top, which really sums up, where you want to go. And if you want to do something, just get on and do it. And it will work if you've got determination. Thank you.